Ladies and gentlemen, I am excited to bring in the first speaker of the day. Put your hands together and welcome Richard Gerver on stage. Ladies and gentlemen, he is an award-winning speaker, the best-selling author, world-renowned thinker, and a TED Talk speaker. He draws upon the first-hand experience and unique insight garnered from the frontline education to explore the links between the leadership, human potential, change, and innovation. His authenticity and uniqueness, which has helped Richard win him global acclaim and invitations to speak on the most recognized stages, including TED, the RSA, the BBC Radio. Let's go ahead and welcome him on board.
Good morning, everybody. It is such an honor, such a privilege to be with you today, to be able to start off this incredible event. And wherever you are, in whichever country, I wish you well, I wish you peace, and I wish you health at this incredibly difficult and uncertain time. And really, it's with the pandemic in mind that I want to begin my presentation today, because I think in some ways the lived experience of the last 12 months make us understand a little bit around the challenge of the future, particularly when it comes to change and uncertainty and the themes so powerfully shown in that introductory video. Change is an extraordinary thing, and it's certainly challenging in education, and particularly when we talk about new technologies and technology in education. And the human experience of the last 12 months explains to us a little bit about why. Because a lot of us were not educated to live in a world of change, of transformation, of uncertainty. You know, we were educated to live lives of certainty, to find the things that really worked for us and mattered, and then to focus intensively on those things, to protect at all costs what we have when we have it. And of course, when the world is thrown into disarray, when it's disrupted by a global pandemic, a global economic crisis, or the emergence and explosion of new technologies, a lot of people find it very difficult to cope. And we go through a whole process of change, right? The cycle begins often for people with a kind of paralysis. When they realize something is about to happen to them, something new, something challenging, something different, they go into a state of almost shock. And you can see it all the time with technologies and education. You can see it all the time when we talk about environmental issues, health issues, because after that state of shock, what happens is people go into a phase of denial. It won't happen the way they're describing. It won't be as serious. It won't be as large. It won't be as profound. And when that emotion doesn't seem to stem the tide of change, then people become angry. They become angry at the people they think are taking away their control. So with technology, often the reflex over the last 30 or 40 years for a lot of people, and particularly some of our more traditional teachers in education, is one of denial. Oh, this technology thing, it's just another idea, it'll pass. And when it doesn't, those people become angry. And when we start to see the sense of inevitability of what we're living through or dealing with, then, and the anger hasn't worked, then a lot of people slip into a kind of mild state of depression, of despair, an absence of hope. Because the thing with change is this: people are fine with change if they feel they have a level of control over it. Change is scary to people when they feel it's something beyond their control, when they feel that all they can be is reactive rather than proactive, when the levers they've been desperately trying to pull to hold on to some semblance of that control is wrenched from them. And one of the things we need to be very cognizant of, both today at this incredible event and as we move into the future and the uncertainty and challenge within the education sector, is to make sure that our colleagues in school, outside of school, all of those people involved in educating our young people for their future, feel that they have some proactivity, some control over what they're dealing with. You know, technology for many can feel deeply threatening because it's not something that they feel is naturally part of their process. And within education, I think there are a large number of educators who fear that technology will take over their control. And so moving on, thinking about today, thinking about moving forward from today, what I want to do is set some questions for you to frame the conversations and the experiences you're going to have at this remarkable event and moving forward. Because what we know about change is that in order to feel better about change, we need to spark people's curiosity, their interest. Because when people start to take an interest, they start to question. They change their perception of control. Suddenly they feel they have some levers they can pull. Suddenly they feel actively involved. And that's the point at which we can activate interest, and we can activate people in a way that feels familiar to them and they feel participants in the process rather than victims of it. So here's my first real thought for you. We need to not see technology as the next silver bullet. You know, in education, in my lived experience, I've worked in and around education now for well over 30 years. And in that time, I have seen so many new ideas come and go. And so many of them have been kind of prepackaged, glossy ideas that are presented to schools and school leaders and educators, almost as a fait accompli. And they're wonderful in the way we sell them. But actually, they've changed very little in terms of process. I mean, take technology in education for a moment. Technology is undoubtedly a game changer in every way. It is going to dominate not just our present, but our future in so many ways we can't even understand and define yet. But what have we done in so many of our schools around the world? We've taken technology and rather than use it as a catalyst for real, meaningful change, we've simply tried to adapt technology to do what we've always done. And so we need to make sure as we move forward from here that we don't see it as just another silver bullet, another shiny new idea. And that means we need to take a step back. And we need to be sure of what our vision is on a human level for the future of education. I'd like to introduce you to a remarkable woman. I don't know how many of you will recognize her or will know her name. This is Minouche Shafiq. Minouche Shafiq is considered to be one of the greatest economists of our times. She was until recently the deputy governor of the Bank of England, and actually for some time was considered to be the woman who may break one of Britain's great glass ceilings and become the first female governor of the Bank of England. It still might happen. She's currently a senior director of the London School of Economics. In 2018, I heard Minouche speak at the World Economic Forum in Davos. And she was talking specifically about education. And she said two things that I want to share with you this morning that I think are both catalysts for our conversation and ways of thinking about our future vision so that we deploy and employ technology in a way that will be really meaningful as a catalyst for true transformation. The first thing she said was this, and it's not entirely new. With all those routine things, all that routine cognition, the way we have traditionally educated young people to live in a traditional world will no longer be necessary skills. And there's a big question to ask there about education, because in some ways we have spent so long just trying to make the system more efficient. And what Minouche says, and she's not the first to say it, is that actually the most important qualities that we can develop in our young people are soft skills, creative skills, research skills, the ability to understand and synthesize information. And again, what we need to be sure is, as we think about the future vision for education, we don't just use technology to impart the first thing. We actually ensure that we use technology to empower future generations and develop those soft skills. Because one of the things we know about the future is the soft skills will be the hard currency of the later part of the 21st and starting part of the 22nd centuries. But in some ways, the most important thing she said was the second thing, which is deeply provocative. And I think something we need to think about very, very deeply and strongly. She said this about the rise of populism around the world, that it's no accident that the people who voted on largely for populist movements around the world are people with low levels of education. But it's not because they're stupid. This, for me, is the kicker point. It's because they're smart. And what they've realized is that the education system and the system in general is just not swayed in their favor. And when you think about it, there's some real truth in there. Because, as I said before, we have prepared generations of people to live lives of certainty with the promise of, if you get your head down and do what you're told and study hard and get your qualifications and go to college and study hard and get your qualifications, you will end up in a job which will pay you well and be secure for the rest of your life. And what millions of people around the world have experienced, particularly since the global financial crisis of 2007 and 2008, is that actually that just isn't true anymore, because the world is turning too fast. And so rather than creating and developing and nurturing and protecting an education system which trains people to live lives of certainty, we need to reinvent what we do and how we do it. We need a far greater three-dimensionality to our education system, and one, of course, that allows people to access education and development throughout their lives, not just until they're 18 or 21 years of age. Much of the sentiment of what Minouche talks about is supported by the OECD, you know, the people that produce the international academic league tables through PISA. In 2013, they produced a report, the first of its kind, called the Skills Outlook 2013. You can find it online. It was the first major report of its kind that researched the links between education, employability, and skills. And its findings were really interesting. And I'm going to share with you now just 4 of the key executive headlines from that report, because again, I think they need to inform our education system and vision as we move forward and as we truly look to explore how we integrate technology and use it as the powerful catalyst we need to really drive our system forward so education is worthy of our children. So here are some of those executive headlines. The first one, incredibly powerful. The first finding of this report, and by the way, the research was carried out not just within the global education sector, but the OECD talked to the world's largest companies too about what they were looking for in terms of future employees who could drive the future direction of their organizations. The first one, the countries who have an over-reliance on the acquisition of formal qualifications over the development of real skills are the countries where young people will find it increasingly difficult to get jobs. Now, I don't know about you, but I think that's an incredibly sobering headline. Because, of course, what happens, like in the UK, in countries obsessed with the acquisition of formal qualifications, is educators and teachers and schools and colleges become focused and forced and pressured into preparing children to take exams often at the expense of developing those three-dimensional skills and knowledge and behaviors that young people will really need, not just to survive, but thrive in their future. We have to recalibrate that. The second finding, again, unbelievably powerful. The research showed very clearly that major organizations and companies hiring future generations no longer see routine cognition as a major competitive advantage. In fact, when they were graphed, when it was researched, when they were asked, routine cognition came almost at the bottom of the list of desirability qualities for future employees. By far, the most important set of qualities future employers were looking for were interpersonal skills. So how do we make sure that is front and center of the education experience for our young people? And how do we use technology to develop that human side of what we're looking to create in our young people? The third point is this. The findings said that future employers are looking for people that can, through their working life, demonstrate the ability to learn, adapt, and change. And again, you know, I can't help but think it has never been more pertinent, given the lived experience of the pandemic that we're going through right now, that we create generations who are better equipped to deal with that constancy of change, the seismic shifts that pandemic is going to cause, not just on a personal health level, but an economic level around the world. How do we prepare young people better to deal with uncertainty, rather than gear our education system up constantly to focus on the promise that if they get their heads down and do what they're told, their lives will work? And then finally, and again, I think this is a really exciting place where we can use technology. There need to be far closer links between the worlds of work and education. You know, in some ways, for too long, they've been too separate, running two separate narratives. We need to find a way to create a powerful bridge between the two, because there is so much learning that we can have by creating partnerships that are meaningful between education and the employment sector. There is so much we can learn about understanding and reframing what we need to do for our young people. Let me give you one example. Here's a remarkable man that, again, I got the opportunity to interview not long, actually, before the pandemic. Again, if you don't recognize him, and why would you? This is Barry Barish. Barry Barish was the 2017 winner of the Nobel Prize for Physics. He is a remarkable, remarkable human being. Many say one of the greatest minds of our era. Well, he would be. He's a Nobel Prize winner. He got his Nobel Prize for his research into gravitational waves. Now, I say that like I know what that means, but I have no idea. He's far too clever for me. Anyway, I got the opportunity to interview Barry a while back, and I asked him the kind of question I often ask people who aren't directly involved in the education sector. I wanted to know about recruitment and what he looks for in the people he brings on board to his teams. So I said, when you went about building the research team that went on to win a Nobel Prize, I said, how many applicants did you have for your research team? He said, well, actually, we were an incredibly well-funded team, Richard. And we had lots of people apply. He said, actually, when we sifted through the applications, we ended up with over 3,500 serious applications. I said, wow. What do you mean, by the way, by serious applications? He said, oh, these were people with at least 2 doctorates to their name. These were people who had had abstracts published in the most respected journals in the world. These were world-renowned scientists on the whole. I said, and how many places did you actually have on your team? He said, well, we were a remarkably well-funded research team out of Caltech. I had enough funding for 138 researchers. So I said, how on earth did you get from 3,500 to 138. He said, well, there were two caveats, actually. He said, the first was this: I didn't want single track people in my team. He said, the problem often in science is people specialize and then focus intensively on their area of research, on their discipline, at the expense of everything else. He said, which is fine. But if you're looking to carry out genuine research of evolution, of innovation, you need three-dimensional people. You need people that have more than just a single track mind. He said, so nobody made it onto my team if they didn't have the arts and the humanities in their backgrounds too. I wanted people with interesting stories, with interesting hobbies. He said, because you see, the thing is, when you're dealing with innovation and change, people who exist in one orbit have such a limited way of being able to push their boundaries, their knowledge and their view. He said, you need people who are committed to constantly challenging themselves and to furnishing their lives with new experiences. I said, and what was the second caveat? He said, the second caveat was this, and this is one of my favorite things anyone has ever said to me. He said, nobody made it onto my team if they didn't have the ability to ask stupid questions. Now just think about that for a minute. We could spend an entire day debating that, right? Is there such a thing as a stupid question? And what stops people asking them? How do we create a world where our young people are able to put their heads above the parapet, show their curiosity and creativity enough to be able to challenge and question without fear of judgment? And as I come to the end, and then in a minute, I hope I'm going to be able to take a few questions from you, I've got one more story for you about one more meeting. And it was one of the proudest days of my life. I don't know how many of you have ever built a kind of list in your head of the kind of people you would love to meet before your time comes, before you die, or the kind of people you'd have at your fantasy dinner party. Well, I got a couple of years ago to meet the number one person on my list, and it was an extraordinary experience because I got to meet, just for a short time, him. Now, there are two things to say about, well, three things actually to say about that picture. The first is, no, it's not a waxwork. That really is President Obama. The second thing is, look how he's smiling. Clearly, I must have been on his dinner party list too, which is an incredible thing, really. I mean, who knew? And the final thing is, isn't it remarkable how many chins a beard can hide? That's where mine comes from. But in all seriousness, the reason I want to finish here is because of the conversation I was lucky enough to have with President Obama. Again, I asked him one question, and the question I asked him was this: what do you think is the most important thing you learned during your time in the White House? And he was so generous, so down to earth, so modest, yet so brilliant. And he flashed that smile at me. He said, I'll tell you. He said, when I first arrived in the White House, Richard, I surrounded myself with the greatest technical minds on earth because I could. I was the president of the United States of America. I was able to use the greatest economists, the greatest scientists, the greatest political strategists. He said, but when I look back on my 8 years in the White House, what I realize is this, actually, that virtually none of the problems that crossed my desk, the problems that crossed his desk, he said, none of the problems that crossed my desk were actually, if you strip them back, technical by nature. They really were human. They were about love, anger, jealousy, greed, hatred, tribalism, fear. He said, and the mistake we make too often is immediately heading to try and find the technical solution for the problems we face. And that means we never get down to the deep foundation of the human issues behind them. And so as you move forward on this incredible day, sharing so much wisdom and knowledge and experience with so many remarkable people. I want you to keep that in mind, both today and moving forward. What is the human element in all of this? Because if we don't find that human element and build on that, then frankly, we're building on very loose foundations. And the future of education, the future of our world, the future of humanity depends on our ability to understand the power and importance of us as living beings. So look, thank you very much. I hope that's been useful. I think now I'm going to take some questions. So if any of you have any questions, then please, I'd love to have them. Thank you.
It was a pleasure having you on our platform. Thank you for coming and sharing insights. I'm sure everybody is delighted to have you on board and to listen to your session. Thank you so much once again.